I have a question for you. What if the symptoms your child is experiencing with FND or functional neurological disorder, the pain, the fatigue, the way the brain and the body seem to be stuck in patterns makes no sense? And what if those symptoms were actually trying to tell you something, not in a woo-woo way? And what if understanding that message was actually the key to recovery? Today, I am sitting down with Dr. Dan Ratner, a clinical psychologist, mind-body specialist, host of the Crushing Doubt podcast, and author of Crushing Doubt, an advanced system for mind-body pain and symptom relief. Dan spent personally 8 years living with debilitating chronic back pain before discovering that the brain was at the center of what was happening. Not because it was made up. Absolutely not because it was psychological in a way most people mean that word, but because the brain is that organ that runs the whole show. And once he understood that, everything changed for him. What Dan and I share is this deep belief that the mind and body are not two separate entities. They're actually one. And that understanding changes how we approach recovery. Whether your child has FND, chronic pain, or both, and then some, this conversation is going to give you a new way of seeing what is happening and why there is a reason for hope. Let's dive in.
For those who are new, can you tell me a little bit about who you are, your background, what are you doing, and how you got to that point of what you're doing?
By the time I finish that answer, it'll be half an hour later. So interrupt as needed. So I am a clinical psychologist, and you and I share this in common. We do this work on mind-body issues or neuroplastic symptoms. There's lots of different ways to say it. But the basic gist is that I'm a specialist in working on how the brain's processes can cause all kinds of changes in the body, and those can lead to acute or seemingly chronic symptoms. Because you and I are similar in this regard, people like Jin and I can alleviate all kinds of symptoms that people wouldn't think that we could, including things that have lasted for years. So I got here the honest way. I experienced it myself. I had 8 years of chronic, every day, every single moment back pain. There was no break from it at all. And I did not have any sense that I was going to get out of it. I didn't know anything about these ideas. I kind of knew a little bit about the idea that the mind could affect the body, but when it's so physical, it's really hard to believe that that's what's going on. I went through a whole process going to doctors, PTs, went to a chiropractor. I did acupuncture. I did virtually everything that you could think to do. And I wasn't getting a lot of relief, and things weren't making sense. And I was 28 years old. And I was like, what's going on here? And I'm having doctors tell me, well, the back eventually breaks down. I'm like, at 28? And what's happening with the rest of my peers are not having that. So I went through that whole experience, and I discovered the works of Dr. John Sarno. And he is a great hero to me. His books did more for me than most human beings in my life. And I'm very grateful to him for all the work that he did to put that together. And what ended up happening is first time I read a Sarno book, I thought, whoa, this is actually making sense. Now, I resisted it for a while because I was like, how am I going to cure back pain with a book? Well, it turns out you can if you get the right information. And I read the first book and it made a lot of sense. I wasn't getting relief yet, but I was very encouraged. I was like, this is making a lot of sense. Maybe this can work. And as I kept working at it, I kept thinking about my emotional experiences. I kept thinking about my fear experiences about my body and how I had been thinking that there's something damaged in my body and that I'm on a one-way ticket to, staying in chronic pain. And then I had an experience where I really paired an emotion with a big uptick in my symptoms. I was always having symptoms, but it went way up at one point, and I saw, wow, this actually is emotional. But not in a way that I thought, because I wasn't aware of the emotion. I just could see it was emotional. Intellectually, I could see it. So then I went back to read another book by Sarno, and it really clicked. And 3 days later, I was doing flips in the pool. I was somebody who was having spasms hundreds of times a day. I couldn't sit in a chair for more than 10 minutes with that happening. I wasn't sleeping through the night well. I had these kinds of spasms for about 2 of the 8 years and on and off throughout. But there was just tremendous aching pain. I was taking Advil all the time. I had given up basketball or really doing much of anything physically. And I had to work through all of that. So that's how I got to understanding these things. And then I decided, whoa, I'm a therapist already, and I was doing pretty solid therapy work, I thought, but I was like, I got to change everything. So then the next thing that happened, Jin, I told you this was going to take a long time to answer this one. Sorry. The next thing that happened is I started kind of putting my name out there with this as my plan to be my specialty. And people would come to see me and I would get them better really quickly from the symptoms. And then we would just be doing long-term therapy. And I was like, oh my God, I thought I wanted to, when I went to grad school, I thought I wanted to do long-term therapy work. And now I was like, no, I got to help the next person with symptoms. I can't be engaged in this long-term therapy. So I've developed all kinds of models now that are either short-term models or group models so that I can help all the people that I need to help. And I've now come to think of myself not as a mind-body informed therapist. I actually think of myself as a therapy-informed mind-body specialist.
Oh my gosh. There's so much to unpack here as a fellow clinical psychologist. And I want to start the conversation with this misconception or myth out there. When there is something physical going on, automatically conventional medical model thinks it's either physical. If it's not, it's all psychological. It's gotta be one or the other. And we are caught in the middle feeling confused, right? What we were told, this is all bulging disc. This is like inflammation of the muscle. Oh, the ligament, is this, right? And then there's this 10,000 different things that can be happening. And then we chase that every single thing as a diligent student, as we should. And then being told it's psychological. And then we think, does that mean that I am making things up, right? Is it all in my head? Like I am imagining things? Am I crazy? So all of the above. And this is like 99, if not 1000% of the people who go through this process. So based on your experience and expertise, how do you define chronic pain that also includes all these somatic symptoms, right? We have a million different names for that.
Yeah. So I feel like there's two parts to that I want to answer. One is that connection between the mind body and how I think about that, because that's part of how I will define chronic pain and other symptoms. Then I'll get to kind of what the definition is. So, but it has been, I did so much research into all of this. And when I say research, I mostly mean I was just reading and thinking and working with people and seeing what was working with them, seeing what was working with me in getting better. I didn't just get better from reading Dr. Sarno. I had to figure out my way of thinking to apply what he laid out there. And that way of thinking then led to my way of thinking with other people and exploring that. And it led to how I would read a book and think about things. And one of the key things that I really needed to understand was what is happening between the mind and the body. Are they these two separate entities? Are they related entities that kind of like work together like colleagues? Are they one? I needed that answer. And here's what I've come to. They are both separate entities and they are one at the same time. And I think that we need to know when they're operating in different ways. Like when is the body just operating on its own? When is the mind largely just operating on its own? And when are they together? And I will say this, the percentage of the time that they are one is by far the highest. I'd say it's probably at least 90%, probably 95% of the time, maybe even higher, that I have come to feel that my whole body is just a flowing emotion. It's like it's my mind operating. And the more I look at this, the more I see that it's all happening together. And I needed to understand the science of that. So I was reading Dr. Sarno's latest book, The Divided Mind, and there's a little paragraph in it that ended up being a really important paragraph to me. And it was where he talked about a woman named Candace Pert. There's some arguments about things that Candace Pert said later that some people don't agree with, but the things she was saying here were incredibly important. And she wrote a book called Molecules of Emotion. And in that book, she lays out what's actually happening between the brain and the body. And to make a long story short, the entire hormone system that we have are these chemical messengers between the brain and the body. And so the brain can tell the body to do whatever. And we see this all the time. And Jin, I'm not explaining this to you because I know you know, but just in talking about this with everyone else, your brain and your mind are constantly being reflected in your body. Even right here, right now, Jin, you and I are talking. Our facial structure is entirely determined by what's going on in our bodies. This is why we gesture. A smile is a mind-body experience. It's a neuroplastic experience. You can't even really control. I mean, I'm smiling because I'm thinking about how great this is. I love this stuff, and I love sharing it with people. And there, boom, a smile. Same thing happens with crying. I remember when I was writing in my book, which was another way that I really researched all of this, having to think about it and how to communicate this to people. I realized that crying is what old psychologists might have called psychosomatic. It is an event that starts in the mind and then becomes very real in the body. And so what I've come to see is that even the most serious symptoms can relate to the mind sending or the brain sending a message to the body to behave in certain ways. And here's my rule of thumb. If the body can do it, if it has the function to do it, the mind can use it. If the body is capable of getting physically ill, your mind can make that happen. If the body is capable of tensing up muscles and keeping them tense, your mind can do that. If the body is capable of having you have a weird taste sensation, the mind can use it. Now to your second question. How do I define chronic pain? The first thing I'll say is that I tend to not distinguish between pain and other symptoms that much. Pain is just one of the symptoms. So I'm more defining chronicity than I am defining chronic pain. And here's how I define chronicity. I define it as what I call consistently acute. If you think about the words consistent, it means it's always there. But acute means there's no underlying cause that should hold it there. It could be made to go away with the right understanding or treatment or however we're thinking about it right away. So that's very different than chronic. Chronic suggests there's an underlying cause that's going to keep this here for the rest of your life or for a long period of time. And I've come to see most supposedly chronic symptoms aren't chronic. They're consistently acute. It means they look chronic, but with the right understanding, they're not.
Yeah, it totally makes sense because when people hear chronic, their interpretation, again, right, they hear and then they process in their mind, and they're processing what comes out is chronic means permanent. That means I have to live with it for the rest of my life. Now it's doom and gloom. And that leads to the sense of helplessness, right? Like, well, there's nothing I can do. So what, right? So there's that. And that ultimately becomes identity. Or maybe this is who I am. I can't just get out of this stuck loop. So totally makes sense. And in terms of this brain and the body, I mean, we're talking the same language. And I always talk about my head is connected to my body, and my head is part of the body, right? And the brain is inside the head. So there is no denying that they are completely separate things. And we are sort of, in this place of it doesn't have to be one or the other, right? Both can coexist at the same time. And when in my program and also on my YouTube channel, I talk about, if you want to learn how to get better, whatever that means, right? Get better. Let's start with what is it that you're dealing with? So let's start with the sort of like proper and correct understanding so that you are on the right path to recover. So you're saying it perfectly, and science proves it. There is a huge, amount of nervous system, whether it's an autonomic nervous system or central nervous system, brain and spinal cord and everything else, all the organ stuff. So that are involved constantly, whether we like it or not. And that's why our heart continues to beat as long as we're alive, right? And so all of the above. We don't have to think about it. So absolutely, I love it. So speaking of, throughout your work, and I get this question a lot too, and I have changed over the years how I define a word recovery, because I just joke, I grew up in hospital settings. And so in my version, recovery means you're not having symptoms, right? Elimination of symptom is how we define recovery. And so more symptoms, worse. More symptoms, what you're doing is not working. Less symptoms, you're better. It was that simple, right? And then there is a reason for that in the acute setting in the hospital. So there's that. And then we tend to carry that definition to that seemingly chronic situation. So how do you define recovery or in your practice and coaching?
Love the question. So here's the way that I define it. I'll have to reserve the right to expand on it, but here's my first answer to that. I think of recovery as having nothing chronic and being able to control acute onsets and upticks. So I don't think of recovery as you're not going to have any symptoms, because symptoms are the human condition. Sometimes people say the only full cure to the symptoms is death. You don't want that cure, because it's the human condition to have symptoms. And part of that is, and I actually want to amend something else I said, maybe 90 to 95% of the time it's the mind, body, or one. I actually think it's more like 99.99% of the time that it's the mind and body are one. There are times where it's like you get a cut on your arm and the body has to heal and you're not worried about it at all. And that's just pretty purely body. But it's very, very rare that it's anything other than the mind and body are one. But when it comes to recovery, it is the human condition to have symptoms, but they should be transient, because we're moment to moment beings. We're changing all the time. We heal from whatever needs to be healed from, if it's a purely body thing. And if we understand mind-body experience well enough, nothing's going to stay chronic, because there's always something we can do, and our moments are always changing. So to me, recovery is about recognizing you're not stuck with anything, but we're going to be engaged in a process where we can gain more and more control over symptoms, and even better, where we can start to see symptoms as, in many ways, our friends. This is our bodies communicating something to us about our psychologies and what's going on for us, or what we need, or what we want. And so to me, recovery isn't just about what happens with symptoms, and it's certainly not just about what happens with chronicity, because there's the acute side of things, but it is also about a change in your mind that makes you feel safer in the world. To me, that's a huge part of recovery, and not just safer from symptoms, but like safer with yourself and in your relationship with you. There's a lot more to what I would say about that, but I'll try to be a little succinct.
Totally. Yes. And I love keeping things simple, right? Because we like to constantly engage in what I would call a mental gymnastics. We like to make things complicated, right? Unnecessary. And so on my YouTube channel, I talk about the recovery is defined by their ability to get back to their life, get your life back with or without symptoms, right? So of course, if there's no symptoms, yeah, we like it. But that's not the only way to define it. Otherwise, then it's just purely outcome based, which we may or may not have control over every single second of our life, just like we don't have any control over what's going to happen 10 minutes from now, for example. The recovery is really about what is it that you want to do in your life, and how could we get back to that? So then you're not stuck in hyper vigilance, hyper monitoring, of, is there any pain? Do I have numbness? Do I have tingling? That, right? So getting out of that stuck loop, we're talking about the same language for sure. Yes. So when you say that, the seemingly chronic, that immediately makes me think about your book that you talk about 3 pillars. And I would love for you to kind of give us an overview of what they are and how this applies to the recovery that you're teaching.
I want to start with giving some credit to Dr. Sarno, where he taught me some things or opened my eyes to certain things. In my experience, I found initially that there was a lot of talk in his book, even, and in the mind-body field, about how, it's about rage or anger, or it's about emotions. And yet he also talked about the incredible paramount importance of accepting the diagnosis. And so to me, this began my way of organizing things, is that some of this was emotional and some of it was about getting to certainty. And so my system's called the column system, because it really divides the experience into 3 different areas. I'll get into the third area in a bit. But at first, I only had 2 columns. It was the emotions and doubt column. And the emotions column were how you deal with and understand feelings and how they relate to symptoms. And the doubt column was really about how you get to certainty, how you manage your thinking to know that you are safe and the diagnosis is right and the symptoms are reversible and you're going to get out of this. And so I had to work on both sides. I thought it was really important, and I got it straight from Sarno. But I've expanded on both of those concepts. The emotions column and the doubt column are quite expanded, even though that's where it started. They're also, I keep it relatively simple. A colleague of ours in the field actually has called the columns complexity simplified, which I was deeply honored to hear that it came across that way. That's what I would love it to be, because life is complex and we are complex. But if we can simplify in ways that are accurate, that becomes incredibly helpful. And so my book's called Crushing Doubt. My podcast is called Crushing Doubt, and I have 3 columns. But so people say, well, why is it called Crushing Doubt? That's only one of the columns. To me, doubt is the overarching picture. It's also a specific column within the system. It's how you deal with the thinking. But the overall picture is understanding why you're going to be fine, how you're going to be fine, that these things are true. It's all about accepting the diagnosis. And to me, that's a much broader picture than accepting that it's mind body or not, or neuroplastic or not. It is about accepting it's also reversible. It's also about accepting I can do this. There's all different elements of this. So I developed these 2 columns. And then what I found is I got all better, where I found, wow, the doubt column's allowing me to prevent anything from maintaining that seemingly chronic stance. It was breaking me out of anything persistent. And the emotions column was allowing me to control acute symptoms, onsets and upticks. I actually was dominating the symptoms, but then something interesting happened. Well, as if that wasn't interesting enough, which it was. It completely blew my mind. It changed my life more than any other events had. But then another interesting thing happened, and that was once I felt that I knew something that the rest of the people in my life didn't know anything about, it opened my eyes to how much else maybe we didn't know. And it made me feel very powerful. It made me feel very alive. And so the 3rd column I call the power column. And it is about the changes that can happen in your relationship with yourself, because the events that happened that got me better from the back pain, they changed my relationship with me also. And I didn't know that was coming. I just thought as long as I can get symptom relief, I'll just return to my life. And that's what I wanted. But something better happened. I couldn't return to the old life. I was better. I had all kinds of new things going on, new understandings, new interests, new wonderings. And it changed my relationship with me in a way that I would call power. The way I define power is defining what that experience was like for other people. It is about peace with the self. It's about feeling at rest about certain things. It's about knowing who you are really deeply. It's about being self-aligned. There's lots of ways I define it in my book. But what I found is all of the things that got me better, I could kind of reverse engineer for other people and say, okay, wait, we don't have to wait for these things. We can look at these 3 areas: feeling, thinking, self-relationship, and we can even see how they're interacting with each other, so that at any given moment, Jin, I could tell you what is happening I'd have to talk to them to find out. But once I get the details, I know what's going on in their columns. I know whether their doubt is too high to do the rest of the work yet, or I know whether their doubt's low, but they don't know how to discover the emotions, and we're going to need to work in the emotions column. Or I know that, no, they're getting good control over the symptoms, but they're stuck at a plateau because they've got a conflict with themselves about whether they can go ahead and be powerful. They might think it means they're a bad person, or people aren't going to like that side of them. And then I went looking for a 4th column. I was like, is there anything I'm missing here? And I just didn't find any. What I found is that these 3 columns, to me, they describe people. They describe how people work in their totality. And it's one of the reasons I love my system. And I say this to people all the time. It's not that I invented something. What I did is I identified what is from a certain angle in an organized way that helps people. This is just the human condition, what I'm describing from a particular angle. But I will also say another thing that I really like about it is that in the mind-body field, you can find a lot of people, they try certain things and it works for some, it doesn't work for others, or it works for some at some time, but then not later. And I don't like partial answers. So I just kept looking for full solutions. And to me, the columns represent that. They can describe what's working when and why, what's not working when and why, what works for one person, but not another, and why.
Yeah, it really speaks to that, the way that I understand and describe this to my audience, and then the people in my community are like imagining that you're rowing a boat. Usually you do it with 2 arms to go somewhere. And it kind of goes back to, right, again, if the what part, like what's happening in my body and my mind, if that what is not in the right place, I don't know if it's a wrong place, but in a different place, then what ends up happening is that rowing a boat in one arm, I'm working really hard very, very hard, always, right? And one more PT, you know what I mean, right? One more supplement, one more acupuncture, like one more this and one more that. Maybe I just have to keep going, right? And then, I am working really hard. What's happening? Going around circles, not going anywhere. Then, so again, it goes back to the starting with the two, right? So this is a mind body in one unit, right? And in the beginning, this arm is like a bodybuilder, by then, right? And then this arm, we have never really used it, whether it was the emotion part or the mindset or the just understanding, oh, two arms necessary, right? Then this one is not fully developed. So therefore it's like a twig, right? So in the beginning, it's really hard to work together. And so for the people who are watching this, I love this three, column, thing. And then your book, has actionable steps, of where to begin, what to do in super detailed way. So I really appreciate that. And, but for those who haven't read the book yet, where do you suggest going in 3 columns? Is it something that they can sort of like discover, or is it something that they have to try all 3 at the same time? What would be the path they can take?
That is a great question. And there's so many different answers to it. I'll say this. I mean, the overarching picture is this isn't as complicated as it may sound. There's 3 main areas. And if you see how they interact, you're in the best spot, actually. Because, I know people want things to be as simple as possible and they want to know exactly where to go. But to me, it's the system as a whole that's going to do the best job, because otherwise it's like the rowboat you just described. It's the same thing with my system. If you are only using one part of it, you're going to be rowing in circles potentially. What I would encourage is try to understand the system in its entirety. The book is a great tool for that. I also have a video seminar if people want like a condensed version of it. The audiobook hopefully will be coming out soon. I'm working on that, among many other things. The first step is really to use one of these resources to get a more comprehensive view. You don't need to understand it totally backwards and forwards before you try out the system, but it's a good idea to get some idea of what's this whole thing all about. And you also can just like come to my groups. I'll teach you it. It's not that hard. There's only 3 columns. They're actually pretty simple ideas, and I can show you how to implement them. But at that point, then we get to the question that you're asking, Jin, which is, okay, how do we use this? So what I've described is knowing what the columns are is how you use them. So that's the first step. The second thing is there's a flow to the columns, which kind of teaches me where to operate when. And it is this: bring down doubt, learn about emotions, flow into power. And that's the order. So if you come in and you're not sure where to start, the very first thing you need to do is to work on bringing down doubt. If you don't bring down doubt, none of the other work will take hold. And so in the doubt column, there are 3 main things that you do in the doubt column. It's observe, articulate, and counter. You observe a doubt. You call into question things you were not calling into question before. You articulate it, just what it sounds like. You put it into words so you can see what's my actual doubt here. And by the way, everybody has thousands of doubts. And the good news is you don't need to get to each one. Just get to a few and you start to get into the practice, and the others start to crumble as things make sense. And then thirdly is counter. So it's observe, articulate, and then counter. Counter is where you have called it into question. You see what the doubt is, you put it into words, and now you're going to use science and logic, or sometimes your own personal experience, to counter that doubt and say, no, I'm not in that kind of danger. I don't have that kind of problem with my body. I'm not stuck in this way. I'm not incapable of doing this. Whatever it is, listen, you can say these things to yourself, but they won't work unless you actually believe them. But good doubt column work will get you to actually believe them. So that would be the place to start. Once doubt's nice and low, the next step would be learn about emotions. And that's where you use the emotions column to consider, how are these symptoms relating to my emotional life? You're really trying to pair up the activity of the brain with what you're seeing in your body. And that's hard to do when doubt's in the picture. So that's one of the reasons we got to bring down doubt first. But once doubt's not in the picture, you can start to see the connection very strongly between the emotions and the body, much more. A lot of times in ways where I'm not feeling the emotion, but I'm clearly having this event with the timing of this, environmental experience and the symptom going up. And you start to see that connection. And once you get that mastered, what ends up happening is when you get doubt low, the seemingly chronic symptoms start to break up. There's a lot more shifting in symptoms. Then you go over to the emotions column and you start to master the acute onsets and upticks and gain some control over it, which, by the way, actually lowers your doubt. So that's another thing, is the columns really interact with each other. And then once you've got doubt down and your emotions really pretty well understood, that's when you can start making adjustments in the emotional life. So I often say the emotions and power column are both emotional columns. The emotions column is where you gain the awareness. Power column is where you make the adjustments. How am I going to change things with me? So that would be the flow, but it works best if you understand how they're operating together, but hopefully that laying it out that way helps.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things we can talk about, right, for hours and hours, with this. And yes, so a couple of things that comes to my mind that I get, again, questions a lot is that one is accepting the diagnosis, piece. Again, it's kind of similar to that sort of like old way, right? Of accepting means I had to give up. Right. So that, again, there's a lot of meaning is attached to it. And the way that I describe is that you're becoming aware of how hard you're being, to yourself, right? Self criticism. And there's a reason for it. And because that's part of the protective, mechanism. And so starting with, the healing sometimes means just acknowledging, yeah, you're having a hard time, right? And accepting doesn't mean that you have to give up. So like starting with unlinking, those two things, they don't have to be the same. And the other one is I do work with a lot of perfectionists, high achieving, A++ is the average, type of mindset, right? Very competitive, very successful, and yet feeling any kinds of struggles. And so those people tend to think of, okay, that means I have to eliminate the doubt completely before I can move on to the next one. And if I, right, have a little bit of doubt coming up, that means I'm not doing my job or I'm failing. You know what I mean? Like that kind of very much black and white, which again is part of the, like defense, protective mechanisms. I don't know if you have experience with that.
I have tons of experience with that, both personally and professionally. So here's what I'll say to it first. This reminds me of when you asked me to define recovery, and I talked about the human condition. It's also the human condition to have doubt. You are not going to eliminate doubt. You're not going to get rid of it all. What you're going to do is lower it. You could eliminate you could eliminate certain doubts, and eventually you do. In fact, I've eliminated lots of doubts. You can eliminate a huge percentage of the doubts, but you're still a human being. You're still going to worry about things. You're still going to have things pop up. And so the way I think about this is that success is about good moment-to-moment living. It's about having a set of kind of protocols or ways that you deal with yourself, methods that help you deal with life as it comes, as opposed to arriving at success. That's not really the way it's going to go. I think of it's like a skill set. There's various things that I do that I love to do, like I play basketball. Nobody gets to a point where they develop their basketball skills so well that they hit 100% of the shots. Nobody. That's impossible. The question is, can you get your percentage higher? Can you feel more comfortable doing it? Is it more automatic? Do you have joy in doing it? It's a skill set. It is a skill set to learn how to think in terms of these columns. And I do think in columns now. Maybe not literally, but I think that way automatically. A symptom comes up and I'm thinking, okay, am I doubting anything about this? All right, is there an emotion going on? Is there something I need to do with power? And luckily, there's only 3. But it's a skill set. So if you want to be perfectionistic about it, okay, you can potentially be perfectionistic about it, but think about it as developing a skill. You're not perfect, no matter what we develop.
Absolutely. And there's this theme, right? That your framework is so simple and I love it. And, many times the less the more, the less the better. And in my program, it's the building resilience, right? So it's not just about one and done, being perfect all the time. It is their ability and skill set to come back from anything and everything, right? So this is the building resilience and then improving your neural health. And I call it brain, building your resilience and improving neural health. And it's essentially that. And so we're talking the same language and I'm talking about the same thing. And so switching a gear just a little bit in terms of like a little bit bigger picture of the awareness, right? Because our field, there are so many proof that this framework is really helpful and beneficial to many, many people. And sometimes I feel like I'm just kind of going up against the, grain of this conventional, right, medical model, or on the other side of the extreme. And tell me about your involvement with the, I always think of it as ants, because they changed the name recently. ATNS.
Yes, right. It's funny, we debated for so long, like, is this acronym good? Are they gonna ANTS even came up, but it's ATNS. So that's the Association for the Treatment of Neuroplastic Symptoms. And I've been on the board for a number of years now. And it's interesting. At the last ATNS conference, which it was only the second in-person conference, actually the third overall in the organization, because a long time ago there was one, but second
Oh, I
year in
didn't
a
know
row.
that.
Yeah, many, many years ago, they had an initial meeting that was probably like 15 to 20 people at most. And now we've got, upwards of 300. I was introducing somebody at the ATNS conference, and well, let me first say what the ATNS is for anybody who doesn't know. It's really an umbrella organization that it's the main nonprofit in the United States for neuroplastic symptoms. Neuroplastic is just one of the many words, but that's the word we settled on because we wanted it to represent that it really is the link between the brain and the body. So that's what the ATNS is. Our mission is to get everybody to understand these conditions. And Dave Clark is the president and the founder of the organization. He's fantastic. And one of the things Dave always says is that we have to think about this like we think about diabetes. If everybody in the world who had diabetes didn't know insulin existed, they would be in serious trouble. And that's really what's happening. We've got 1.5 billion chronic pain sufferers in the world. And those are just the ones reporting the pain. And that's only about pain. If you really think about who's having these kinds of neuroplastic symptoms, it's probably 99.9% of all people. And it's impacting their lives. And so we're working to get the information out there to get to a tipping point where more people understand this than don't. It's very commonly talked about. It's very commonly understood. Your average medical doctor would know it. Your average psychologist would know it. Your average consumer would know it. So that's what we're working towards. Now, jumping back to the 2025 conference, I was introducing somebody, and I said this thing that I was just reflecting on it. I was like, worry is too strong a word. When I first got into this work, I thought, I'm kind of late to the party. Dr. Sarno's already done all this, and there's other people that are ahead of me in the curve. And it's not about me, but there was, some little part of me that was like, I want to be really in the party. We're early. This is right at the beginning of everything. Anybody who's an early adopter of this, it's still in the early adoption phase. And so the ATNS is really trying to spread the word about that and get people to understand it. So when I came onto the board, I didn't realize how early we were in the process, even of the ATNS. We've changed our name in part. I'll say this, just own this part personally. It used to be called the Psychophysiologic Disorders Association. And when we were debating what should we change the name to, I was one of the many, I think we all basically agreed on this, but we wanted to get rid of the word disorder because this isn't a disorder. This is the human condition. And if we think of it as a disorder, it does change how people could perceive this or understand it in an accurate way. Now, to make a long story short in terms of what happened from that time, the board has really moved things in a very positive direction since the time that I've been there, not just because of me. I put in my work, but the rest of the board has done a fantastic job. The staff that we hired has done an amazing job. And we've gotten it now where we've got this growing conference, and I don't have to tell you, that's where I met you. It's like summer camp for neuroplastic conditions. I mean, we were so excited to be with each other. And it was very relieving to me to feel like I don't have to change the world by myself. There's all these other people working on this, and we're all working together. The ATNS is working to coordinate those efforts so that everybody has these understandings. And I've recently become the board chair, and so I'm working really hard to continue to expand what we're doing, to organize what we do, to help us get to a point where people could see us just as legitimate as the American Diabetes Association. People need to know this is science-based. It's logic-based. This is not voodoo. These are real conditions, and a lot of people are catching on to them. So we're working to get people to understand that. I can say much more about it, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah. I forgot that you guys used to call it psychogenic or like what a psychosomatic. And it's similar to the specific subset of people that I work with, with FND, functional neurological disorder, and then they keep changing their names, right? So that the category continues to change. Now it's part of, functional neurological symptom disorder, which is part of somatic symptom related disorder, which is also pain disorder is now part of, and all of these things. And it's very confusing. Once again, for many different reasons that result in people doing this mental gymnastics and then being confused. And so I'm really glad that you guys changed the name. And also, this is not like woo-woo, stuff. This is based on science, based on evidence, based on brain body research and all of these things. And I actually had a live event last night with some of the families who have been watching on my YouTube channel videos about any Q&A. And a couple of them mentioned it's really good thing that they actually have a chance to be exposed to the science and articles, studies, so that this mind-body work is not just common sense or Mr. So-and-so got better. It's not just that. It is really based on, proven method, proven strategies, and proven pathway. So it's not just something that is suspicious, like snake oil, kind of situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's really at the ATNS, we take it very seriously to not be even affiliated with pseudoscience that seems like it runs along with what we're saying, because that's not credible then. We really do need to focus on what has been proven. How does it all fit together? How does it fit with evidence-based scientific findings? And the great news is it's continuing even more to go in that direction. I mean, we're discovering all kinds of things, and I hope there will be many, many studies on all of it to keep showing this. But there's already tons and tons of studies about this. Not only that, but there are studies on the other side that disprove that things like certain structural issues cause pain. They've been debunked. A lot of people are very surprised when they hear things like herniated discs don't have a correlation with back pain. I mean, I thought that would be the case. Or how about arthritis? The word arthritis, the number one association with arthritis, still to this day is pain. And yet there are studies that show there's not correlation between arthritis and the pain.
Oh my gosh, we can definitely talk more about that, right? So the question is, can you have arthritis and pain at the same time? Yes. But can you have pain without arthritis? Yes. Can you have arthritis without pain?
Yep.
Yeah,
which is it's really interesting. I mean, it was mind-blowing to me, but it's true.
Yeah, we've got so many great things coming up, and I'm so excited to continue to expand this awareness, right? Because the knowledge is the power. Let's just get to know the what before the how, and this is just the beginning. And to me, same thing, with you, Dan, that I was thinking, wow, I'm late in the game. There are so many people who are doing this, and this is like, research out there. And I just assumed everybody knew. Just because you and I are in it doesn't necessarily mean that people know. And so, okay.
We won't be late in the game until we've put ourselves out of business, which is, by the way, is what we want to do. I mean, we ultimately want people to know about this, and so that they're all fine. I don't need to do this work forever. I love doing the work, but if we actually get everybody to see this and people are getting better right and left all over the place and it's heading in the right direction, I can find something else to do. That's okay. It really is our mission. And when I say our, I mean the entire neuroplastic field. I think we all feel that way. You also said one thing that I thought was really interesting a little while back, maybe 20 minutes or so ago. You were talking about acceptance. And I think it is so important to recognize that acceptance is much more about awareness and what can change from that acceptance than it is about accepting some negative thing. And to me, that's one of the greatest parts of this work, is the hopefulness that can come from the fact that information alone can change what goes on up here, and that can change what goes on in the whole body because of it. It's all about the information. And all we got to do is be willing to talk about it.
Like on the long line, acceptance might be one dot. And then some people think this is the end, right? And other people think that's the beginning. So absolutely, I am with you 100%. So what would you say? We talked a lot, and then there's so many things that I want to, uncover And maybe we should do like, series number 2. Right,
I
with
would
this.
love it. I would love it.
And what would you say to the audience in terms of acceptance, recovery, hope, and mind body? I mean, this is really, to me, having the condition is the adversity that is sometimes necessary to build the skills of resiliency, is what I would say it. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about what you want to share, with the audience who are watching this, who may not have even begun this work yet.
Lots of things I could say. I'm going to highlight one in particular. So my book is called Crushing Doubt. My podcast is called Crushing Doubt. And the reason I chose doubt as the centerpiece of things is it's incredibly easy to slip into doubt. Doubt is the easiest job in the world. And it can pick up something your neighbor said, something you read in the paper, or actually, I guess we don't read the papers anymore so much on the internet, but I'm showing my age. But you can pick up doubt from anywhere. You can even pick it up from your own mind, just saying something scary to yourself. And so what I would encourage people is that the first place we need to start is engaging with our own doubt, even just recognizing it's there at all, or recognizing that it can be removed or dealt with, because otherwise it passes itself off as truth. And then you can really get lost in feeling like there's no hope for this. I can't do this. These things didn't work, or people don't know how to do this, or that's just something people are doomed to. That's all doubt. We have to learn to challenge these assumptions and explore what really is. And that's why, to me, doubt is the linchpin of so many of these things. Every single person who's trying to engage in recovering from these things or figuring out what's happening, they're all at different, phases of doubt or having a different doubt experience of the moment. And if you don't know you're having that experience, you'll just accept the doubt as truth. And that's when you get stuck. But if we can open up space to consider, wait a minute, I have a line in what I say, which is you make sense and your symptoms make sense. If we can just believe there's a way to make sense of these things and we can study it, and there's enough voices like you and me out there offering ways of understanding it that do make sense of it for people, we're going to get where we need to go. So it's really about recognizing the doubt is there at all and deciding we're going to put up a good fight against that. We're not just going to accept that. We're going to look at this.
And that's the hallmark of neuroplasticity, right? Our ability to change, and what gets fired gets wired. And the more story that we repeat, whether it's helpful or not, it gets hardwired. So that's the hallmark of neuroplasticity, our ability to change. And yeah, it's really empowering thing. And then the first thing that people try to get out of this, again, is to have the hope, right? Have hope and then start the work.
Let me say one other thing that I think can give people hope. Change can happen fast. I mean, it's one of the hallmarks of neuroplasticity, which is the second you learn something new, your brain has changed instantly. I mean, try to forget how to add. You learned it, you know it. Try to forget how to read. You learned it, you know it. They say it's true about riding a bike. It's true about everything you learn. And if you learn that there are these neuroplastic conditions and they are real, and let's say you learn that, oh my God, thinking about my emotions actually did help me with that symptom. You just learned that. Your brain's totally different after that. Or if you learned that, bringing down the doubt actually made the symptoms start to shift, you just learned that and you're not going back.
Yeah, once you see it, there's you can't unsee it. Absolutely. Yes. I'll definitely include your link to the book. You do have a YouTube channel, right?
I do. It's called Crushing Doubt on YouTube. Yep.
Perfect. So we're going to link all of those things so that people can find you and as a resource. And at the moment, I don't necessarily work with adults. And a lot of people find my channel on YouTube who are adults. And again, it's a neuroplastic beyond just one simple diagnosis, whether it's a chronic pain, fibromyalgia, right? Or CRPS, or FND, and then some. It's the whole, mind body stuff that can be applied across those categories. So I'm really hoping that many of people who are watching this video can find your resource extremely helpful.
I would love that. I do have a website as well, www.crushingdoubt.com, and it has all of my resources on it, including a link to the book, but that you have to get through Amazon. But there's all these different ways that I've developed to help people, and many different options. Some of them are really cost effective too. A lot of people are struggling with these things and they can't afford that much. Come check out my resources. We'll get you situated.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for your time. And it has been incredible. You and I we know, and that doesn't necessarily mean everybody else knows, right? So this is really inspiring. Thank you.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here with you, Jin. Thank you for having me on. I would love to come back, and yes, I agree. We could talk about these things for months, years, and we will.
Before I let you go, I want to pull out 3 things from this conversation that I think are really important for families navigating FND. First one is this: chronic pain is extremely common in FND. If your teen has FND and they're also dealing with pain, that is not a coincidence and it is not a separate problem. The same dysregulated nervous system that drives the motor and sensory symptoms of FND also drives chronic pain. So Dan's work and my work are basically pointing at the same thing from slightly different angles. The second thing is that even if your child does not have chronic pain as a primary complaint, everything Dan talked about today still applies. The mind-body principle is not about pain specifically. It is about how the brain learns the patterns, gets stuck in them, and how new information and awareness can start to shift those patterns. That is neuroplasticity. That is what we're working with in Teen FND Academy. And the third thing, and this is the one thing that I want you to sit with, is the idea of doubt. Dan built his entire framework around this because it is that important. Doubt is the thing that keeps families stuck. The doubt that says this will never get better. The doubt that says we have tried everything. The doubt that says maybe this is just who my child is going to be for the rest of their life. The doubt is not truth. It is a pattern, and just like every other pattern the brain creates, it can be changed in a good way. In Teen FND Academy, we talk a lot about empowerment and self-awareness as the targets of recovery. What Dan calls crushing doubt and what I called building resilience in the brain, they're essentially the same work. We are teaching the brain that it is safe, that it has the agency, and that change is possible. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So if today's conversation resonated with you, leave a comment below. I want to know what landed for you. And if you want to see more conversation like this one, let me know in that comment too, because your feedback is what shapes this channel, so then I can help you better. Links to Dan's book, podcast, and websites are all in the description box below. Go check out his work. It is worth your time, especially for adults who are struggling with FND and chronic pain. I'll see you in the next video.